The refrigerator was making that sound again, the low, rattling hum I kept meaning to get looked at. I noticed it that morning because the house was so quiet. No television, no footsteps upstairs, no one calling my name from another room, just the hum and the light coming through the kitchen window at an angle that reminded me, for some reason, of the house I grew up in. Funny how your mind reaches for something familiar when everything else stops making sense. There was a note on the kitchen counter, folded once, my name written on the outside in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. I stood there looking at it for a moment before I picked it up. I don't know why I hesitated. Maybe some part of me already knew. We need space. My mother is staying with us for a while and the house feels crowded. It would be better if you found somewhere else to stay. We'll talk when things settle down. That was it. No date on it. No love. The handwriting was neat, unhurried, the kind of penmanship you use when you've thought something through. Valentine's Day weekend, and I was standing in the kitchen of the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 4 years, reading a note that told me to leave. I set it back down on the counter. I walked to the window. The neighbor's dog was sitting in his driveway, just staring at nothing the way dogs sometimes do. I watched him for a while. Then I went to the garage, got in my truck, and drove. I should explain how I got here. Not to excuse anything. I'm past the age where I feel the need to explain myself to anyone. But because it matters, the how of it matters. My son married his wife 6 years ago. I liked her well enough when they were dating. She was sharp, had opinions, laughed loud at things. My son seemed happy. I'd raised him alone after his mother passed. He was 19 when we lost her, and those years after were hard on both of us in ways we never really talked about. So when he found someone who made him light up like that, I was grateful. I kept my mouth shut about the small things I noticed, because you do that. You're the parent. You take the long view. They moved into a house about 40 minutes from me. His wife had a daughter from a previous relationship. The girl was 8 when they got married, and she was a quiet kid, watchful, the kind of child who seems older than she is. I tried to build something with her. I brought her books. I taught her to play chess. She'd sit across from me at my kitchen table and move her pieces carefully, thinking it through. For a while, those Saturday afternoons were something I looked forward to. What I didn't see, or didn't let myself see, was the shift happening in my son's house. It was gradual the way these things usually are. His wife's mother had been living alone in another state since her husband died, and over time she started visiting more. First for a week here and there, then for whole months. Then she just stopped going home. My son's mother-in-law was a particular kind of woman. I'll say that carefully. She wasn't mean exactly. She was calculating in the way that some people are calculating without even being fully aware of it, always managing the room, always keeping score. She'd been the kind of mother-in-law who left passive comments that took you a moment to parse, the kind where you'd be driving home afterward and suddenly understand what she actually meant. She decided early on that she didn't care for me, and she was too experienced to be obvious about it. When she moved in for good, things changed faster. I started getting called less. Visits that had been regular became occasional. When I'd call my son, he'd often be short with me, not rude, just distracted, like he was standing in a hallway and could be pulled away at any moment. I'd invite them for Sunday dinners and get vague mabes that turned into last-minute cancellations. I told myself it was life. They were busy. His wife was working. His stepdaughter was in middle school now. Things get complicated. But then there was the money. I want to be honest about this part because some people listening, will wonder why I did what I did for as long as I did it. The answer is simple and a little embarrassing. I loved my son. That's it. That's the whole answer. He'd called me when they were in a tight spot, about 2 years after they got married. His wife's hours had been cut. The mortgage was a stretch. He didn't ask directly. He never did. That wasn't how he was raised. But I understood what he was saying. So I started helping. A few hundred here, a bill there. Then the mortgage directly, which I told myself was temporary. It wasn't temporary. Over the next 4 years, I covered most of the mortgage on a house that was not in my name. I paid for his stepdaughter's private school tuition, 2 years of it, because his wife said the public school wasn't right for her. I bought them a new water heater when theirs went out. I paid for the vacation they took to see his wife's sister in Colorado. I'm not listing these things to be pitied. I'm listing them because they matter to what comes next. My son's mother-in-law knew about all of it. His wife knew, and somehow in the logic of that house, knowing where the money came from, did not translate to appreciation. It translated to expectation. The first time I felt it clearly was at dinner, their house, a Sunday in late October, maybe 2 years ago. I'd driven over with a pie my neighbor had made, the woman 2 doors down from me who'd known my wife and always insisted on feeding me around the holidays. I set the pie on the counter and came to the table, and his wife's mother was already seated at the head. Not the chair she usually sat in. The head of the table. I noticed. I didn't say anything. Partway through dinner, she started talking about the house. Improvements she thought they should make. The kitchen could be opened up. The backyard needed landscaping. She said it all in that tone, not asking exactly, not suggesting, just sort of declaring, like these were things that would naturally happen. My son nodded along. His wife nodded along. And at one point, his mother-in-law glanced at me and said, "You've been so helpful to them. I'm sure you'll want to see the place really come into its own." The way she said helpful, like I was a handyman they'd been lucky to find. I smiled and ate my dinner. I drove home and sat in my truck in my own driveway for a while. I thought about my wife, which I do sometimes when I need to think clearly. She would have known what to say in that moment. She always did. I never quite figured out how she did it, said the right thing, held her ground, kept the room warm. It was a skill I didn't inherit. After that, things moved in a direction I should have interrupted sooner. My son's mother-in-law started making decisions about the house, their house, in ways that slowly edged everyone else to the side. She picked a contractor for the kitchen renovation. She was there when he came to look at the space. She was there when he came back with estimates. My son told me about it like it was good news. "She's really taking charge. It's actually been helpful." I asked if I'd be consulted, given that I was covering the mortgage. He got quiet in a way that told me someone was listening. The renovation cost more than the estimate. It always does. And one evening my son called and said they were a bit short. Could I help bridge the gap? I said yes. I always said yes. What I should have done, any reasonable person will tell you, is stop saying yes about 2 years before I did. I know that. I'm 63 years old and I know that about myself now. But I kept thinking, he's my son. This is my son. If things ever go sideways for him, if the house, the marriage, the whole structure comes apart, I don't want to be the reason. I don't want him looking back and thinking his father let him fall. What I didn't ask myself was, what am I teaching him by catching him every time? It was a Tuesday when I found the back door locked. I'd driven over to drop off some things, some tools he'd asked to borrow, and a birthday card for his stepdaughter. I had a key to the back door. They'd given me one years ago for emergencies. When I tried it, the lock had been changed. The new one was a different color than the old one, brighter, still had that new hardware shine. I knocked. My son's mother-in-law answered. She looked at my key and then at my face and she said, pleasantly, "Oh, we had to have the locks changed. There was some concern about the neighborhood." She took the tools and the card. She said my son wasn't home. She said she'd tell him I stopped by. She smiled, and it was a particular kind of smile. The kind that means we both know what's happening here, and you can't say it out loud. I drove home. I didn't call my son that night. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that went cold, and I thought about that smile for a long time. He called me 3 days later. Didn't mention the lock. Talked about his stepdaughter's recital, about a project at work, about nothing in particular. I let him talk. At the end of the call, I asked casually, "Did your mother-in-law mention I came by?" A pause. "She said you dropped off some stuff." "Thanks for that. She changed the locks," I said. "Yeah, there was a thing with the neighborhood. Some stuff happened a few streets over." "My key doesn't work anymore," I said. "I'll get you a new one," he said. He never got me a new one. The months after that were a kind of slow unwinding. I kept paying the mortgage because I didn't know how to stop without it feeling like an act of war. His wife's mother was fixtures in that house now. She had opinions about everything, including, I heard secondhand through my son in an unguarded moment, about whether I was too involved. That was the phrase, too involved. Me, the man paying the mortgage, who had been given a key and then had it revoked without explanation. I tried one more time. Christmas had come and gone without us spending it together. They went to his wife's sister's place in Colorado, which I found out about after the fact. I didn't say anything about it. I sent gifts for his stepdaughter. In January, I called and suggested we do a belated family dinner. Just us, my son, his wife, the girl. Somewhere neutral, a restaurant. I said I'd pay. He said he'd check and get back to me. He didn't get back to me. I drove over unannounced on a Saturday. I know that's not something you're supposed to do, but I'd been waiting and I needed to see my son face to face. His wife answered the door. She looked surprised, not pleasantly. She said he was out. I asked when he'd be back. She said she wasn't sure. I stood on the porch of the house I was paying for, and she stood in the doorway, and neither of us said the thing that needed to be said. Then her mother appeared behind her. She didn't say anything either. She just stood there. 2 women standing in a doorway looking at me. I said, "Just tell him I came by." And I left. It was a Wednesday in February, 4 days before Valentine's Day. When I came over to drop off some medication my son had asked me to pick up for him. He'd had a prescription to fill, and since the pharmacy was near me, I said I'd handle it. I parked in the driveway and knocked on the front door. No answer. I knocked again. I could hear the television inside. I tried calling his cell. No answer. I was about to leave when I noticed the note taped to the inside of the storm door facing outward. A folded piece of paper with my name on it. I stood on the porch and read it in the cold. We need space. My mother is staying with us for a while and the house feels crowded. It would be better if you found somewhere else to stay. We'll talk when things settle down. I stood there long enough that the cold started working through my jacket. I reread it twice. The handwriting was calm. The message was calm. We need space, as though I lived there. As though I'd been underfoot, taking up room. I had not slept a single night in that house in 6 years. I came by for dinners, for errands, for my grandchild's recitals. I paid the mortgage every month and kept my opinions to myself and showed up when I was asked. And now there was a note, taped to the inside of the door so I'd find it, but no one would have to say it to my face. I took the medication out of my coat pocket. I set it on the porch railing. Then I got in my truck and I sat in the driveway for a long moment and I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would say. And I thought, clearly maybe for the first time in 4 years, what would she actually say? She would say, stop. So I drove home and I made some phone calls. The first call was to my bank. I explained the situation briefly. I had been covering a mortgage payment on a property not in my name and I needed to stop the automatic transfers. The woman I spoke to was professional and efficient. It took about 10 minutes. The transfers were canceled effective the following business day. The second call was to the private school where my son's stepdaughter was enrolled. I spoke to someone in the billing office. I explained that the account had been funded by a third-party arrangement that was no longer in place, and that they should contact the family directly going forward regarding the balance. She thanked me and said she'd send a notice. The third call was to my attorney, who I'd known for 20 years. I told him I wanted to formalize a few things. He said to come in Thursday. I didn't call my son. I thought about it. But I kept thinking about that note. It would be better if you found somewhere else to stay. And I thought, they made a decision without me. They told me with a piece of paper taped to a door. So I made some decisions without them. That seemed about right. My son called on a Friday. It had been 12 days. He started with small talk, which told me immediately he didn't know yet. We talked for a couple of minutes. His voice was that careful kind of normal too, even, the kind that means someone in the room is listening. And then he said, hey, I wanted to mention, we got a notice from the mortgage company. Yeah, I said. A pause. It says the payment didn't come through. That's right, I said. Another pause longer. Did something happen with the bank? No, I said. I stopped the transfer. Silence, a long one. Then quietly, Dad, I got your note, I said, the one on the door. He didn't say anything for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The smooth, careful tone was gone. He said, that wasn't. She shouldn't have. Is that your house? I asked. What? The house. Is it your house, or is it your mother-in-law's house, or is it your wife's house? Because I've been paying the mortgage for 4 years and I had a key until someone changed the locks without telling me, and I've been getting notes on doors. So I genuinely want to know whose house it is. He was quiet. Because if it's your house, I said, then maybe you should pay for it. He said he needed time to figure things out. I said that was fine. I told him I'd canceled the school payments too and that the billing office would be in touch. He made a sound I recognized. The sound he used to make as a boy when something had happened that he couldn't fix and he didn't know what to do with that. I felt it. I want to be honest about that too. I felt it all the way through me. This was my son. I had held him in a hospital room when he was 4 hours old. I had sat up through fevers with him and watched him learn to drive and stood at the back of a church when he got married and felt nothing but grateful that he had found someone. I loved him, but love is not the same as having no limits. I had confused those two things for a long time. I went to see my attorney that Thursday as planned. I had already put some things in order after my wife passed. Property, accounts, a will that I'd updated a few years back. There were some adjustments to make. I made them. My attorney is a plain-speaking man who doesn't offer opinions unless you ask for them, which is one of the reasons I've used him for so long. He reviewed what I asked him to review and he said, "This is straightforward." I said, "Good." On the drive home, I stopped at a diner I used to go to with my wife when we were young. It had changed ownership twice since then, and the menu was different, but the booths were the same. Dark wood, high backs, that particular way the light fell through the front windows in the late afternoon. I sat in the booth we always used to take, the one in the back corner, and I had coffee and a piece of pie. The waitress was maybe 25, friendly, didn't hover. I sat there for almost an hour. I thought about the years. I thought about the choices I'd made, not with regret exactly, but with a kind of clear-eyed accounting. The money, the patience, the doors I'd knocked on that took too long to open. The note. I thought about my son. I thought about the boy he was and the man he'd become and the ways those two things didn't always line up the way I'd hoped. I thought about his mother, who had loved him so completely and so wisely, and how differently she might have handled all of this. How she would have said the things sooner. How she would have loved him and still told him the truth. I didn't know if my son and I would find our way back to each other. I still don't know. He called twice more in the weeks that followed, and those conversations were harder. Less careful, more honest. The kind of honesty that costs something. He said some things that were difficult to hear. I said some things I'd been holding for a long time. I don't know if we resolved anything in those calls. I don't know if resolution is the right word for what we were doing. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was just two people finally talking. His mother-in-law left the house in late March. I heard about it secondhand. My son mentioned it briefly neutrally, the way you mentioned weather. She'd gone back to her sister in another state. I didn't ask why. The mortgage is his to deal with now. His wife has a full-time income. They're not without resources. They made arrangements with the bank, as people do. The school reached an understanding with them about the tuition. I stayed out of all of it. I had done what I could for as long as I could, and then I stopped, and that was that. What I know is this. I drove by the house one afternoon in April, not planning, just happened to be on that road. The kitchen light was on. Someone was moving around inside. I could see the shape of them through the window. I don't know who it was. I kept driving. There are things you hold on to, and there are things you set down. I'm 63 years old. I buried my wife. I raised a son. I worked for 40 years and built something and paid my debts and tried to do right by the people I loved. That's the whole of it, really. That's what I've got. The refrigerator is still making that sound. I keep meaning to call someone about it, but some mornings I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and I listen to it, and it doesn't bother me the way it used to. The house is quiet, and the light comes in at that angle, and it's mine. It's just mine. And that, I've decided, is enough.